Welcome to an entire Next.js crash course. This is what we're going to walk you through and show you the basic of how to get started with Next.js and some of the things that you should know. But the question you might be asking yourself now is, what is Next.js? We're going to explain this in this entire video. But first, if you're new here, consider subscribing. If you're already subscribed, thank you so much. Without your help, we wouldn't be here with this channel. So please consider subscribing. Anyway, let's get back to this. So what is Next.js? Well, if you've used React before, you might see yourself as, hey, you might need to choose what they call a router to configure. Like after you use React, then you need to choose a React router to install it and then figure out how to configure that. Trust me, this might take you hours. Then you might need to deploy it somewhere, maybe to GitHub pages or maybe to Heroku. So you need to deploy it somewhere. And then if you are into TypeScript, then you need to figure out, okay, how to add TypeScript into this. Then you need some sort of SAS or some sort of like CSS superpowers to configure this. So all these configuration, not even to mention internationalization, to get this all into just a React application. So this can literally take you hours, even weeks, just to kind of get everything to the way you want it to start building. Well, with Next.js, you don't have to do this because everything is built in for you. You got routing built in. You got literally everything. All you have to do is just start writing code for your application and never have to worry about configuration. It's the best thing. Yes, it is. But how do we get started? Let's dive right in. So in order to get started, all you have to do is just go to nextjs.org, then click on docs. Wherever you see docs, it will take you to get started. Now, once you're here, there's a couple of things you can check. As you can see, they need you to at least have Node.js installed. If you don't know what Node.js is, all you have to do is just head over to nodejs.org and then install the LTE version. Then once you're done, that basically means that you pass this requirement. And of course, Mac, whichever of this computer. And once that's set up, you can just copy this command. I'm going to right click, copy this command. I'm going to open my terminal, wherever you have your terminal, navigate wherever you want this to create this new project. I'm going to navigate here. I'm going to go inside my YouTube folder and then paste this command in there like that and click enter. And this is going to go ahead and create your first Next.js project for you. Now, it will take a second based on the computer that you have. If you have a faster computer, it will take, of course, faster time. In this case, I just need to give it a name. I'm going to call this one NextJS crash course. And then click enter, and this is going to spin up and install everything that I need in a second. If everything goes as expected, then you should have something like this. Now, the prompts and instructions are pretty familiar. If you see here, you can run dev to start the server, blah, blah, blah. But first, in order to do any of those, you need to go inside this project. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to cd inside the project that I just created. And then once you hear, all this command will be able to run for you. In this case, I'm just going to run run dev. And if I do that, that's going to go ahead and start a localhost on port 3000. So I'm going to go and click that. I'm going to try it again. Give me 1 second. I'm going to copy this, all localhost. And this one should be port 3000. So if I click that, and there you go, we got a Next.js project ready to go. Now, again, all I have to do is just a couple install and boom, I'm ready to go. But how do you start working with this? I just see your terminal, but how do you work with this? Do you just work with this in your terminal? No, you need an editor. Now, the text editor that I do recommend is VS Code. If you don't have VS Code, I highly recommend you do. It's one of the best editor out there. That's what everyone, I was working on a team of 25 developers. Everybody on my team use Visual Studio Code. Anyway, too much talking. I'm going to open Visual Studio Code. I'm going to click open to navigate where it is. And then I'm going to open this into my editor right here. And this is the folder that we just created. I'm going to click on it and click open. And voila, my Next.js project is open inside Visual Studio Code. Now, what do you get out of the box? Well, out of the box, you get a couple of things. Number one, you got a package.json that kind of show you everything that they come with. However, there are some packages that are not included here unless you eject it, just like typical React application. But yeah, you got something that you can work with, and you can install new dependencies or create new one. And then you got the Next.js config that pretty much where in case you want to extend a certain configuration from Next.js, this is where you can do that. And then after that, you got ESLint that is also built in, and a couple other things. But the most important one here is this one called Pages, right? This is where you're going to be writing most of your entire application. This is where it's going to go. We're going to show you guys how you can use Pages. But one thing I want to mention here, it's pretty simple. Pages, public, and voila. And then you got a Next.js application that pretty much look like this, right? But how does it work? Well, the way it works is, remember, like I mentioned earlier, when you're using Next.js, everything coming built in for you. You don't have to install anything else. Pretty much they give you everything you need to build an entire application. We talk about cloud. You don't even need Heroku to host your application. They give you everything, literally everything. Or GitHub Pages, we're going to talk about that. And even Typescript, you don't even need to go and do further application, further configuration. It's all built in for you. We'll show you how you can leverage this, which is pretty cool. So first thing first, let's talk about routing. Let's show you how this works, right? So typical React application, you would have to figure out how to configure this, how to do this, yada, yada. Well, check this out. Every single file or folder that is inside the Next.js, it's built-in route. So they automatically create the router for you. What that mean? Well, here's the index.js. This is what we are looking at right now. So whenever we go to this page, this is what we are looking at right now. However, check this out. So if I come here, I'm gonna come here and say, hey, this one's going to be home page, and I'm just gonna return a very simple h1 tag. For example, I come here and say, hey, this one's gonna be an h1 tag, just writing a couple components. And then after that, we're gonna export this one as default and possibly import React from this. Yes, so we'll import React. We'll say this one's going to be React and this one's going to be React. And voila, we got something that pretty much look like this. Let's see if we can take a look at it. And then we'll do okay. We'll copy this one and we'll say export homepage as default. Let's make sure that's correct. And voila. So we got a very simple component. And now if I refresh this here, and then if I go back to the page, you can see now I have something that is hello world ready in the page for me. Super simple, nothing crazy. And if I want to have the same thing, I just go under the pages and I'm going to create another file. I'm going to call this one about.js, and I'm going to come here and then paste that one in there. And I'm going to say for this one, I'm going to say I am the about us page, right? I'm going to add this one right there, and voila. So if I go back here, now check this out. To see that about us component or pages that I just create, all I have to do is under the pages, the name of this file, which is about us. So I need to come here, put / about us, you see, and voila, I'm navigating between different pages. Look at that, I'm navigating between different pages. This is how easy it is. You don't have to configure anything. Let's take another one. I could say contact us and copy this one. I'm gonna say this one, I am the contact us page, something like this. So I'm gonna come here and remove that. And then again, all you have to do, if you go under pages, this is named contact us. And then I'm just gonna replace this one to say contact us. And now we are inside the contact us page. Now it go a little bit further more than that. Let's assume that you had some sort of nested route, like something you go like, let's say about us, and then you can possibly have your teammate. For example, you can have something like Sterling or something like that, right? So let's build that. So I'm gonna go under, instead of about us this time, I'm gonna create a folder. I'm gonna call this one about. And inside about, I'm gonna create my team an individual file. I could come here and say, okay, this one itself, this is going to be Axime Sterling. I am Axime Sterling. You can have the idea. I can replace this one to be I'll keep it the same way. And now if I refresh this again, you can see now I'm Axime Sterling. And again, you have the idea. I can go even further. I could say Steven. This one's gonna be instead of hello world, I'm gonna say Steven page. And you can build another teammate, Safari. I don't know who that is, but Safari.js. I hope that is my teammate. And then you can come here and kind of build that Safari. And you got the idea at this point, right? So now I can come and say Steven, and that shows the Steven, and I can come here and say Safari, and that shows Safari, right? But here's the cool thing about Next.js. That's a lot of people love it, and sometimes that can confuse a lot of people. Now imagine if you have 100 teammates. This is going to get very long pretty easily, right? 100 teammate, this is going to be 100 file. Now imagine if you have a platform like Facebook, a million, billions people on it. You can think about this having a billion file. But luckily with Next.js, you don't have to do this. They have something called dynamic routing, and this is where it really shines out of the box. So here you can come here, and I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this one, you see, I'm using bracket. Check this out. I'm using bracket open, and I'm just going to say username. You can give this any name you want. It doesn't have to be username. You can name it name, or I'll call this one username. And then from here, I'm going to name .js. Now, when I first worked with Next.js before, when I saw this, I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? But actually what that means is, I'm going to show you in a second. What that means is anything that you pass, it doesn't matter if you pass gems, or it doesn't matter if you pass anything that you pass after the about that you pass here, it's going to refer to that file. Yes, it's going to refer to that file. So let's take a look. So now I have the same component. I'm going to call this one user name page, something like that. And then this one, I'm going to call this one I am the username page, right? I'm going to call this one here I'm the username page. Pretty easy. I'm going to go back and delete all of these 3 files that I had before. So I'm going to delete them, come here, and I only have now check this out, right? So if I go back and enter Steven, remember I deleted Steven, you see it's still rendering this page. It's still rendering this page. And if I come here and I write something Sterling, and I write Sterling, and then you see it's still rendering the same page. No matter what you write, it's still rendering the same page, because this one is listening for anything that you type after the about us. Why? It's because this file, or aka this file, is located under the about us. But if you remember before, we didn't just have username. We were displaying the people's name like Steven, Safari, yada yada, right? What if you wanted to get the actual value from this? Well, this is where it got the built-in router. And how you can do this is you're gonna use the built-in router that they have. I'm gonna come here, and I'm gonna come here and say, okay, I'm gonna use the next router. And I'm gonna come here and say, I'm gonna use router. You see, so that's pretty much how you bring the router they have built in. You don't have to do anything. And then after this, I'm gonna say, hey, router. I'm gonna say use router now, you see here. And then within the router, I'm gonna actually start using something that they have that's pretty cool. And what I'm gonna use from that router is actually, I'm gonna be using something called query. So I could say, hey, router.query, and now I could use the username from here. So username, what this is referring to, this is actually going to refer to whatever you give the name to that file. So what I mean by this is, if you name this to be ID, this is going to refer to ID. If you name this to be anything else, this is going to refer to anything else. So let's give it a try. Let's display this and see what happens. So I'm gonna console log. This one's going to be username. I'm gonna come here and say, okay, this one's going to be username. And now I'm gonna open the inspect element just for you guys to see. And look at that. I'm now seeing Axime inside my console log. Let's change it. Let's say Steven. You can see here, I'm not getting Steven. And if we change it to be Safari, I'm not getting Safari. But we don't want this entire console. We want this display inside the page. And to display it, it's pretty easy. All you have to do, copy the username. And I'm gonna come here, instead of username, I'm gonna paste this in there. And voila, this is it. Let's try it again. Now you can see we have Safari. And if I go here, we have Steven. If we go here, we have James. You got the idea by now. And this is cool. We can start building application and never have to worry about routing. You can have dynamic routing. You can have simple routing, which is gonna take care of everything for you. So now, before I go any further, I'm gonna come here. We name this to be something ID. I'm gonna call this one to be ID. And remember, the file name changed, which means now you're gonna have to come here wherever you had the router. I'm gonna rename this one to be the actual ID. And I'm gonna come here display this one to be the user ID. And if you see, it works just accordingly, still listening to the same thing. So basically, you see, it's really simple to get started with. All right, now that you see how cool Next.js could be, the next thing we're going to talk about is going to be data fetching, right? So one thing I want to do in this case is I'm going to come here to the main page, which is we're going to come here to the about page, and I'm going to try to fetch some data. Now, the place I'm going to be using, it's something called JSON holder.typical.com. We're going to click, can see here, you can just copy this entire file, and then the next thing we know is we'll be fetching some data, right? However, inside our code, we're going to use this in order to fetch data on when the page loads or when the page re-render or whatever. So I'll need to use in some built-in React function here. So I'll use effect, and use effect will allow me to listen to or wait for the page load. For example, here I can come here and say, okay, this one's gonna come here and do this, and I'm gonna come here and possibly just say hello world. So what's gonna happen is after the page loads, this is going to fire, right? So if I go back here, you can see the page loads and then this got executed. So which means now I can fetch my data knowing that the page loads, then it's gonna do some sort of async operation in order to go ahead and get my data. Now, this might sound confusing, but let me show you some code and show you exactly what I'm showing you guys, okay? So here's what I'm showing. So here, I'm gonna make an API request. I'm gonna do here fetch, and I'm gonna make an API request to get a list of to-dos. In this case, I'm gonna come here and say, okay, and then this one's going to be res.json. Let's do that. If I can type it, res.json, and then after that, we'll have it noted then, and we'll have a noted catch. We'll explain this in a second, but what we basically mean, okay, whenever we get the data, after we get the data, if the data is success, this is how we want to handle it. If the data fails, this is how we want to be able to handle it. So that's what's happening here with the that then. This is in case we got the data, that's how we want to handle it. In case we don't, that's how we want to handle it. Now, the next thing we do is let's try this out. So we are fetching some data, and then we are just console logging them to the console. So let's take a look. As you can see now, if I do refresh this, data is not defined. I need to define that data right there. And then now if we refresh this, you can see now I have a list of to-dos, right? I have about 200 to-dos that I can display to the page. Now this, if I go back, I'm gonna go back to change the network to throttling. I'm gonna go back to slow connection, and I'm gonna actually just refresh this, right? And if I refresh this, this is going to be a little bit slow just for you guys to see what I wanna show you. So first the page is going to load, then the data is going to appear in the console, right? So this is what's happening. Well, sometime we might want to show the page with the actual data. Yes, we might just want to render the page with actual data. And again, this is a slow connection, so it's definitely going to take longer than expected. You can see now this page loads, then my data got to appear into the page, right? Well, what if you wanted to, when the page load, instantly show the data? And this is where static rendering comes into hand. Let me show you how that works right now. So static rendering, the way it works is, instead, what you can come here, you can come here and create a function. The name of the function is very important. It has to be that name, okay? So I'm gonna come here and create that function, and I'm gonna return everything as props. Check this out. I'm gonna leave this one here and make sure it is exported, okay? So this is very important. So this is where we are creating our function. Now, everything we pass it here, such as hello world, is becoming available over props to the component. Remember, this is our React component. So what that means is everything now is available over this props. So if I come here, console log this one, I'm gonna say props, I'm gonna console log this prop, and I'm gonna possibly just hold this one now. Now check this out. So I got get static prop. I'm passing this value as a props right here, and I'm receiving them right there as a props. So if I go back to the page, if I come here, refresh this, or you see in a second. So the main issue I'm having now is because this one should be an actual object. So I'm gonna come here and say props. I'm gonna call this one name. I'm gonna say hello world instead. There you go, voila. So that should work. And here you can see now the props up in return, a quoting from what we sent to this one. Now, one thing I want to mention, this one only works on page component. So it only works in component that are located inside the page. So if you try to add this to another component that is not within the page, it might not work for you. Just keep that in mind. So get back to what I'm saying. So instead of fetching the data after the page loads, we can actually prefetch data. We can fetch them, and by the time the page loads, we inject them into there. This is where static rendering comes into very handy. But how do we do this? Well, the way we do this is actually pretty simple. So now we'll copy this entire thing here. We're gonna bring this over right there. So I'm gonna come here, and here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna fetch this data. Instead, I'm gonna use some sort of async await to wait for this data. So I'm gonna come here and say, hey, this one's going to be data. I'm gonna wait for this one, and I'm gonna remove all of this. Now I should be able to get to-dos. And now after we get this data, I'm gonna pass all the to-dos. So I'm gonna come here and pass all those to-do. So technically, yes, that's how it works. Now, instead of fetching inside here, I actually went ahead and fetched it inside here instead. So check this out. I'm gonna come here, delete this one, even delete this one. I don't need this anymore. And check this out. If I come here, refresh this, and I refresh this one now. And you see, when the page loads, I already have over 200 to-dos ready to go. Check this out. When I refresh this page, the to-dos already there. They don't have to refresh. I'm gonna try to throttle this one again. I'm gonna go back here, refresh. And this, of course, is gonna take a second. And then as the page is loading, you're gonna see now, whenever that hello world is there, the to-do is also going to be there on the page, ready to be displayed as well. Let's take a look. And there you go. You can see now the hello display and the to-do is already there. Of course, if we want to be fancy, we can try to display them to the page by just doing a loops. We can come here and say, okay, I'm gonna come here over to do, and I'm gonna do map request, and then after that map, I'm gonna go here and pretty much display every single item from there. So I can just say this one's going to be p tag, and I'm gonna select every single to do. This one's going to be to do, and after I select every single to do, just gonna display them to the page. How am I gonna display them to the page? Every to do seems to be having, let's take a look, it seems to be having a title, so I'm just gonna get the to-dos title from there. So that should display all the to-dos are looking into the page. I'm gonna come here and update no throttling, refresh this page, and let's take a look. Let's take a look. Oh, nothing happened. I think I know why. So I'm gonna come here, move this, and then add this instead. And I, of course, need to add the key. Just gonna come here and see if there's a key that we can leverage. Let's take a look. Yes, I think there is a key. I'm just gonna add the to-dos key here. Give me 1 second. I'm just gonna add the to-do.id. Yep, that should be unique, and we shouldn't be seeing this error. And now we are displaying all the to-do inside the page. Now, again, the get static props can be confusing, but the bottom line is you're now able to fetch data before even the page render. Now you can get access to this entire one. So this one is there in case you want to fetch data from the hemless CMS. If you've never heard of hemless CMS, basically means that you connect to another external resources where you have your data. These requests could be happening right there. Or maybe you want something that is more like database request that you want to handle right there too as well. Do not expose any credentials for your database here, but more making requests to retrieve certain things that you want to pre-render, and it's super fast. It is extremely fast instead of doing use effect right there. Now that you've at least take a look at get static props, there's another one that actually got that you can leverage, which called get server side props. Let's take a look. So if I change that and then go back to the browser, refresh it, you don't see any difference. You might be wondering, Sterling, what is the difference between get static props and then get server props? Well, the difference is this. Well, the get static props runs on the browser itself, so which means you get access to certain things on the browser. But this one itself actually run on the server, which means whatever you see here, if I come here and add a console log, in this case, I'm gonna add hello world. If I come here and display, I'm going to refresh this one. If you notice, I don't see the console log. You might be wondering, okay, where is your console log, right? Well, your console log now is on the server. If I come here to my terminal, if you remember, this is my terminal. This is now all the data. It's now running on my server. Well, if it is running on your server, how can you prove that? Well, if you've worked with server before, there's certain property that are available for you. For example, there is the request, and then there is the rest that are available for you by default if you work with any server, right? In this case, the fact that we are inside the server here, I can come here and create something. I'm gonna pass a param called context, or from that context, now we have a couple of things that's available for us. The first thing that's available is the request, and the second thing is the rest. How you want to see this? Well, let's take a look. In this case, I'm going to get the header that are going to the server. So I'm going to come here and say context that request, and for this one, I'm going to display them right there. So I'm going to come here and say this is the header. So check this out. So now, if we take a look at this, and I'm gonna come here, refresh it. Again, we're not going to see anything here. But if I go back to my terminal, which is right here, I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna actually search for it. So let's refresh this again. And I'm gonna go back to my terminal. And let's see, now you can see, hey, this is what we got from the header. Did I display everything? Yes, I did display everything. I wanna get the header from this. Let's refresh it again. I'm gonna refresh this. And now we should only be getting the header from this one. So if I come here, let's see, let's refresh it one more time just to make sure that we got the header. If I come here and one more time, I'm gonna come here, I should be seeing the header. The to-dos are just too much. Here's what I'll do. I'm gonna comment this one out actually. Just gonna make the to-dos just a simple array. And then I'm gonna refresh this just for us to see the header that we see. We can now see the entire header that we work with. So this is how we can tell we on the server. But when you use the get static one, how can we tell we were on the server? Well, super easy. So the one we use, it's something called get static props. I'm gonna call this one. And for this one, I'm actually just going to leave something like hello. I'm just going to leave the header right here. So I'm going to say hello world. And I'm gonna remove this one and let's try that. So for that one, I'm gonna come back to the page, refresh this page, and then here, you can see here, and what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna come here and inside my hello world, I'm gonna display the context. Let's check this out. So now if I display context, I'm gonna come back, refresh this. In this one, we're going to actually not see any requests. Instead, here's my context. You see, I see something like locals, default locals. These are things that can be leveraged to build what they call internal languages for different languages based on the people visiting your website. You can see here, this is not things that do have access to the server compared to get server props. So basically, that's how you use this. But the last one I want to show you, again, these could be very tricky, but I want to show you guys a last one, right? So what if you had, if you remember on my case, I had something here that were pages, and then under pages we had about, and under about we had some ID. What if I wanted to prefetch some of the data that do require an ID? So for example, I wanted to come here and based on the ID that I do get, then go ahead and prefetch this data, right? What if I wanted to do that? And in order for you to do this, they actually have something else I'm gonna show you called get static prop. And again, the name is very important. You cannot name it something else. It has to be the exact name. So let's give it a try. I'm gonna call this one here. I'm gonna copy this one, come here. I'm gonna open that. And again, always make sure you export this by default. Now, why am I showing you this? Well, the reason I'm showing you this is because I've seen a lot of Next.js applications that are not leveraging this and they're missing on performance. When you use things like that, they really help you boost your application to the end consumer. So you definitely want to make sure that you're using them because again, Next.js kind of handles that for you. You don't have to go with the nightmare of use effect. You can now prefetch some of the data to make it available faster to your end consumer. So for that one, all you have to do is just do get static path. Then after this, I'm gonna come here and return this one. We're not going to return prop like we saw from the other one. Actually, we're going to return something different. So we're gonna be returning path. And then within the path, it takes an array. And then within that array, within that array, it actually takes an object. And then within that object, it takes the parameter object. Now, what just happened? Well, the same way you see here, it is very important that you match this. You have to path and then you have to do params in order for you to use that, right? So once you have this, usually whenever you use get static, it typically use it inside with get static props. So what I mean by this is we'll have another function like the one we built before, which is get static prop. I'm gonna go back here and use another one called function. In this case, I'm going to come here and then do this. So these two pretty much work together. So technically, if you have the get static path, you possibly need to use this one as well, because after you get the actual path, then you can send it to the get static path, and then from there you can make a request. So let's give it an actual example. So let's see what we can do here. And then from here, I'm going to come here. If you remember, I'm going to come here and return my props. I'm going to call this one ID, whatever is Steven, right? So whenever you come here, again, typically whenever you use get static, there is a chance you're going to be using get static props. So basically, you're building different parameters that are going to be possibly available into your web browser. So if I come here, refresh this, I'm going to come here, refresh this. It might throw an error, and that's okay. Now, the reason it's throwing the error is because the params doesn't have anything here. So I'm going to come here. Now, number one, I don't think that yet. So they're complaining about this key. So whenever you're using get static path, you need to make sure that you're using the fallback. So I'm going to come here right after path. You see, right after path, I'm going to come here and add fallback to true. And let's try that. So if I refresh this, again, I'm going to go back here, refresh this, it might throw an error, and there you go. You can see now parameter is required, which means inside this param, I need to pass it the exact parameter that I'm expected here, which is the ID. In this case, I'm going to pass it Steven for now, right? So there you go. So I'm going to come here, refresh this. You can see now the page is working. Now, getting this to work could be tricky, but this is me just showing you guys the boilerplate. So basically the simple version of how you can get this. Now, you might be okay, Sterling. You're just coding things out. I don't see why we might be using this, right? So, well, after you get the ID, you could fetch things out, right? So let's assume that you want to get a to-do by ID and to pre-render that before even to pre-render that into your page, right? So now that we have this ID, by the way, if you change this ID to something else, let's try it out. So if I refresh this one we had Steven, and this one, we had something called James, right? So in order to get this specific ID, now I have to come here and do context. I'm gonna come here and do context. I'm gonna display context just for you guys to see what we had. If you remember, from the get static, we had the locals, use default local, whatever. If we were using get server side props, we had the request and the response. We can get access to the headers, yada, yada, and yada. But now that we are using the get static path, we're gonna be seeing something get added. So if I come here, and now I'm gonna scroll down, I'm gonna actually refresh this and then go back here. Now, not only we see the local, but we can see now we have a new value called params, and this is the value of Steven that we have, which is this specific Steven. Now, if I change this one to be Peter here, and then come back again, you can see now I have this param, and this is equal to Peter. And these are the things that you could do. So once you're getting the correct ID, in this case, I could be getting 1, I could be getting 2. And here you can start using them to make your call, okay? So if you remember from the previous request, we're making an API request. So here I'm just gonna come here, make another API request. I'm gonna passively just go here. Oops, give me 1 second. I'm gonna come here again. And then this one is going to be the catch. And what I'm gonna do for both of them, I'm just going to come here, console log the data. I'm gonna say this one's going to be data that we're gonna be console logging. I'm gonna pass this data right there, and I'm going to pass the error message just for us to see the error in case we got an error. And this one itself is going to be returning them as JSON, and voila. Now we just need to pass it the URL where we want to fetch. In this case, we want to fetch this specific endpoint using this parameter, right? So if we do this, and I want to use a second weight with this instead, so I'm going to come here and say, okay, this one's going to be data, and actually this one's going to be a single to do. That's what we want to prefetch. I'm going to weight this one, and now we can passively just delete all of this, and we can pass it this one to be to-dos, and we pass this to do right there. And if we come back to this props, we can now console log that to-do because we now prefetch that to-do based on the param. Again, that might seem challenging, but let's see what we have right now, and we console log this. All right, so let's see what's going on. So here's what we're doing. We are getting the params using the get static path. We are then reading the param using context. Here we're gonna read them. We're gonna read them in a second, but assuming we got the param here, which we're gonna get in a second, so it's gonna be available under this, and it's gonna be available like this. And then we're gonna use whatever value we get, then we're gonna fetch the API. Then we should be, after we fetch the API, we're gonna pass this as a prop. So let's take a look. So if I do refresh this one, and if I refresh this, we can now have a props that actually have this to do unique. But if you remember, I need to be changing, like it needs to prefetch based on the number that I pass it. Right now, it's only giving us the ID one. Well, the reason being is because if you remember, the data now is available over here. Somehow, I just need to remove that ID and combine this, or you can just use the backtit, which is this one here. And I'm gonna come here and copy this value. I'm gonna call this one ID, and I'm gonna store a value here that's gonna call this one ID, to do ID, something like that. And voila, there you go. So that should give us now every single to do that we type. So check this out. And after we got the do's, we can display the title of the to do now because we got access to this data. So we can come here and say, hey, this is going to be the title of the to do. It's going to be props.todo.title. Let's try that out. That should work. So I'm going to refresh this one. You see? Oops, there's an error. So I'm going to come here to do. Title is not defined. So I'm going to refresh this one again. And in this case, I'm assuming that it's not getting the data yet. So I'm going to add this question mark to say if there is not, don't crash technically if you don't have anything. There you go. We have some issue. Something's not working as expected. We are getting some errors. Let's see what's happening here. Oh, it's to do. It makes sense because this is not ID. This should be to do ID. So I'm gonna come here and paste that in there, and let's try that. Voila! You can see here I don't even need this question mark that I added. I'm gonna remove them. Now we can feel safe. Technically, you need them if you're building an application. As you can see here. I needed them, so I'm gonna add them back. This is more like a safeguard in case, like, as you go in that deep, you don't want the application to crash, right? There you go, voila. So we prefresh the data using, I'm getting number 4, I'm getting different data. I'm gonna come here, I'm getting different data based on the to-do. So I know there's been a lot, it's been a lot, but hey, these are the things that you could do with Next.js, right? And there's a lot more to it. It's not just about writing. It's not just about doing this. For example, for you guys that are interesting, let's see how we can add TypeScript into it, shall we? Let's do it. Before we add TypeScript, there's one thing I want to show you guys, right? So it's not just about you guys prefetching, pre-rendering the data while you're doing this, right? So remember, there's a lot of performance involved. And one of the performance is whenever you use those, they pretty much cache it for you, right? So if we're working with caching, it might take you some time before whatever is in the cache got updated, right? Well, they have something called, let me write that for you as you work with Next.js. They have another functionality called incremental static regeneration. So what this is going to do for you is it's going to go and check within the cache after a period of number of seconds, and then if anything is different, then it's gonna return for you the newest updating changes. In other sense, in case whenever you're making an API request, there are some new updating data, then your application is updating accordingly. How do you implement this? It's actually super easy. All you have to do, look at wherever you got the get static prop, and then right after the props, so in this case, right after here, I just add the keyword we validate, and I put the number of second. In this case, every 10 seconds, it's gonna check everything that is inside the cache. And then after 10 seconds, if there is anything new, then it's gonna go ahead and update that for you out of the box. Now, again, you don't have to worry about the logic, implementing this, doing this, yada, yada. This is already built in for you, ready to start using out of the box. Now, if you don't know what TypeScript is actually a really cool syntax type version for JavaScript. So it allows you to see errors before you even push your code. So if something is not working, TypeScript is going to let you know that, hey, this is not working. You shouldn't be pushing this. It's going to fail the app, preventing you from making big mistakes as a developer. And there's a lot more. They also have autocomplete. So as you work with object, you can have an idea what this is and what this is, right? So how do you integrate it? Well, to integrate it is pretty easy. All you have to do, come here within the terminal, you're gonna create a file called tsconfig. And once you create that file, for right now, this file, if I search for it, it is completely empty. As you can see here, it is completely empty. Well, if I go back, stop my server, and then you run yon dev or npm run dev. In this case, I'm gonna do npm run dev. You can see now I'm getting an error. Let's see what I'm having. Yes, so I'm gonna copy this. I'm gonna copy this one, just install this one. I'm gonna install this. Once I install the packages they mentioned, and now I can just run my server. And here, my app is starting. And if I go back to my application, refresh this, you can see here I have this, but now check this out. All my configuration is built in for me, and I'm ready to start using TypeScript within the project. There's a lot more about Next.js that you can learn. I hope this guys at least kind of give you an overview of what's available for you. If you want to learn more, they do have a really cool documentation that you can explore. So if you go here, we talk about pages, we talk about data fetching, we talk about server-side static, all of this. We built in CSS supports image optimization. This one actually is pretty cool and pretty easy to use, right? So this one will optimize your images for you, whichever image that you're using. All you have to do is just use this image and ready to go. They have font optimization. If you're using Google Font, this is actually not supported for all of them. I believe currently it's only supported for Google Font plus one other one. It's within the documentation. There's the static filing as well. There's the fast refresh. There's a lot more that you can do with this. The last thing I want to show you before I end this video, which I almost forgot, is doing something called API routes, right? So we saw from our example, we were able to navigate from different routes, yada, yada, and so on, right? But what if you needed something that you wanted to get from the server itself, like you wanted to handle some sort of server request to avoid course issue, or to be able to make a request to your database using some sort of secret credentials that you don't want people to see? Well, I'm going to show you this. So API route, how do you use this, or how does that work? Well, just like we saw from pages, right? We can start building different components, but there's one folder that comes pre-configured for us, right? Something called API. Well, the name is very important. You cannot just go ahead and change that. Or what you can do here is, now we have a file called hello.js. You can start writing actually Node.js code right there and send requests or response just like you were writing a Node.js application. So you don't even need Node.js anymore. You could process transaction here like Stripe API. You can leverage it here. You could do Slack bots, anything you can think of, right? You can do them here. Now, check this out. All I have to do is navigate to my application /API, and I'm gonna /API/hello. And now I have a JSON request here. As you can see right there, if I go back and possibly open that, you can see I have a JSON request right there. And if you want to build extra one, you can. I'm just gonna say come here and possibly just add a checkout, something like this. And then from there, I can possibly copy the same thing. So all you have to do is create a function. In this case, I'm gonna call this one checkout function. You can see here, and I'm gonna please enter, and then make sure you export this one as default, right? And then start here, you can start using the request. And if I want to send a request back to the client, all I have to do is just send JSON here. I'm gonna send a JSON request back, and in this case, I'm gonna send a message. I'm gonna say, yay, something like this, right? And there you go. We have another route that people can send requests to. This one is called checkout. It's the same thing with this one. Actually, I'm just gonna call this one handler, and voila. So I'm gonna come here and then come here, and instead of hello, I'm gonna call this one checkout. Let's see, and voila. Now we have the checkout. And again, let's try to rename this to something different. Instead of handler, we're gonna change this one to checkout. If we try this one again, you can see I still got the same data here. There is no difference. So the name doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be handler, but typical name they call it, it's more they call it handler. Just they know that this is what's being handled here. And of course, if you're using the Twitter packages, any other packages, you can start leverage them here. Pull any packages that you want. You can start building things right there. So the same thing, if you want to use some sort of dynamic API route, you can do the same thing as well too. You can start building again. I'm going to copy this one, bring this one over here. And for that one, if you go here, you could say something like API, and API, let's do another folder. Actually, we'll do something very different to what we did. We'll do the same thing that we did for that. So it will be API/about, and then whatever we want to do. We'll put Steven, and you can see now this also return whatever we pass it within that ID. So again, these are typically the same process that they use, and these are the things that you can do with Next.js. So this is more like a crash course. This is more to get you guys with things that you could do with Next.js. But again, none of them might make sense for you, and that's okay. None of them. But if you want us to see us building application with Next.js, leveraging it to actually build real core application functionality, stay tuned. We're going to be coming up with a lot of series about Next.js that show you how we can use the little things you learn from here into our application in real life. But what if you wanted to deploy your Next.js application? Do you need Heroku or do you need GitHub Pages? Well, they also have something called Vercel.com. And actually, Vercel is the company behind Next.js. So if you want to deploy your application, you can deploy your application to Vercel. They process a lot of requests. So if you come here, they process over 24 billion requests per week. These are just applications running on Vercel that you can scale using your Next.js application. So we're going to see all of this into the series. So you definitely want to make sure that you follow along, because we're going to be showing you everything on how we can use them to build real application.